Welcome to the June version of the Community Development Committee meeting, St. Croix County. Let's start the way we always do, introducing ourselves. Start with Mr. Counter.
Okay. So it's Scott Counter with District 11, Star Prairie Township, where I live.
Ed Schockner, District 1, which represents Village of Somerset and part of the town of Somerset.
Judy Ochterhoff, District 17, which represents Silen, Deer Park, Emerald, Forest, Glenwood, and Glenwood City, and I only live in one of those.
I'm Dan Hansen. I represent District 12, which is part of New Richmond and part of Star Prairie Township. That's the part that Scott doesn't represent.
Sean Anderson, District 2, so I represent the other part of the town of Somerset and most of St. Joe.
Ellen Denzer, Community Development Director.
Tamara Traxler, Community Development Staff.
Brett Budrow, Community Development, Planning, Land Information.
Julie Peterson, Community Development.
Throughout the evening, we'll be introduced to other staff with Community Development Department. We have with us also Mr. Bill Peavy, who is the Vice Chair of the St. Croix County Board. And let's get on with it. Let's do the roll call. We never do roll call. No, we don't need to do roll call. That was roll call. Minutes approval. Let's have a motion.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. All right, so we have a public hearing. Ordinance repealing Chapter 17, Subchapter 3, Section 17.3 St. Croix County Code of Ordinances, Shoreland Overlay District, and reenacting the Shoreline Overlay District as Chapter 16 of St. Croix County Code of Ordinances. So we'll open the public hearing with staff report.
Yes, we'll ask Tammy Traxler from our department to give an overview of the ordinance changes.
Well, good evening. We'll start the public hearing, like Ellen said, with information for the returning committee members. This will be a very similar presentation that you heard back in February. And we'll just, if you have any other questions, but up to this point, we have not received any comments from the public regarding the ordinance, even since our February update. So for those in the audience, 1968 is when St. Croix County first adopted shoreline zoning. This is granted by two different state statutes and administrative code that develops those standards, those criteria that we need to follow. In 2010, we went through a major rewrite of the shoreline code. And through that process, it took us until 2014 to get those changes adopted. After 2014, we had several legislative changes. So really, since 2014, we've been operating with many different acts, statutes working against us. So really, the intent of this ordinance tonight is to move forward with these changes so that we have an ordinance that's in compliance with all these state statutes and the changes that have occurred over the through 2015 to 18. So for this rewrite, what we utilized was the state of Wisconsin provided us a model ordinance, and our Chapter 15, the newly adopted general zoning code, were two of those guiding documents that led us to where we are. So the intent here is to actually repeal our current code and recreate it as a standalone Chapter 16. Big picture of what shoreland areas look like in St. Croix County. So there's your navigable water bodies, your lakes, your rivers, your streams, your ponds, and then there's all the wetlands. So you can see the pocketed wetlands throughout the map and throughout the county. So 1,000 feet is what we regulate for those navigable water bodies, those lakes, those ponds, and then 300 feet from our rivers and streams. And so the big thing with shoreland is really thinking about the structure setback. So the intent here is try to have that 75-foot structure setback from these type of water bodies. In our current code, we were separating wetlands by their size. Under the new code and state statute, we are required to regulate all wetlands. So even just a little pocket wetland, we're required to regulate them. So that will be a change here, where we used to have it as 10,000 square feet as our first trigger. Now it's all wetlands. The next one is we removed this inland wetland district. This was an idea that, so wetlands that are not covered in those shoreland areas, we were going to regulate those wetlands outside of that. That has now been removed from our code. Again, this was just a slide that kind of covered wetland regulations and trying to outline why we chose to remove inland wetlands, and really because wetlands are covered by many other agencies, and again, state statute changes, it made sense just to get rid of that inland wetland regulation. Here's a summary of what changed, and this was provided in the packet too for the public to review. Again, you'll see that on the right-hand side, these are basically all changes that were required by statute. Here, I'd probably point out impervious surface. We used to regulate based on 10%. Our first trigger for water quality was 10%, and again, to be in compliant with the state, we had to raise that level of impervious for a lot to 15%. Again, so clarification, administrative procedures changed, but that's all because it's now a standalone chapter. So recapping where we've been, back in February, we had our information meeting, then COVID hit, and now we're here with the public hearing, and we'd like to schedule county board next, and then hopefully looking at an effective date of August 1st or whenever county board would act on this one. Any questions? All right, I suppose we have to.
Well, my question is, I mean, I can read through this, and I hate to say it, but a lot of it is a lot of gobbledygook, because it's just, in simple layman's term, what are the specific things that have changed, and how is it going, is it have a, I don't mean to put you on the spot, like a positive or a negative effect on, compared to what we had before?
That's a good question. That's a loaded question. The positive is that we're going to have an ordinance that staff could administer that's all comprehensive in one location. I think that's the biggest gain for us as a staff, given a lot of the changes that we had to make, or the changes that were made, we had to make because we needed to be in compliance with the different administrative codes and the state statutes. So the positive is that we are going to have an ordinance that is in compliance with all those codes. So outside of that, it's...
To make it easier, is the majority of the changes stricter than what we had or more lenient?
Well, there were sections. So again, going back to impervious, I highlighted that one. We had to be more lenient. So counties are no longer allowed to be more restrictive than the state.
That doesn't, so did we have to change a lot of ours that we were stricter?
Correct.
Okay, that
Yep,
kind of
correct.
answered my question.
Yep. Yep.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sean.
I just, what changes are there, if any, that weren't mandated by the state?
What changes were? It's a good question. So I outlined in here, I'm going to say everything that we didn't go outside of any of those changes. We stayed strictly to what was required by the state statute to be in compliance. Again, the state provided us a model ordinance, and we followed their model ordinance. There's certain spots, for instance, that were vague. Boathouses being one of them. So boathouses, we defined the height of a boathouse that was allowed. That's where the state was silent on. So depending on what side of your opinion, whether that was more restrictive or not. But again, with boathouses, we aligned ourselves very similar to what other counties were doing for as far as like sidewall height of a boathouse. So again, that's where they were silent is where we would try to address those areas or those conflicts, but ultimately we have an ordinance that's now compliant with all the state statute requirements.
I'll ask my question. Regarding the impervious surfaces, you have a double asterisk. It says treated impervious standards. Just real quick, what is a treated impervious standard?
Treated impervious. So if it's an indirect way of the state getting a landowner to voluntarily create a treatment system and to reduce their impervious. So, for instance, if a landowner wanted to put a patio, and so instead of doing a concrete patio, maybe they put in pervious pavers with maybe an infiltration system. So then it took it from being 100% impervious down to maybe 60% impervious. So by doing that, okay, so, and that's again that footprint of that structure, mind you. And so overall, if that made that lot stay below that 15% threshold, then they wouldn't have to do any more mitigation of that impact. Yeah.
Ed?
So now every wetland is daily, is shown on the map. So, okay, so what can you all do within that 1,000 feet, or what can't you do within that 1,000 feet?
So wetlands are different. So wetlands aren't 1,000 feet. There's no setback to a wetland. So that, if we talk about, revisit the changes. So when we had a 10,000 square foot wetland threshold, we had a setback to it. Now all of a sudden, if we have to regulate all wetlands, it's now hard to put a setback to all wetlands. If that makes sense? So it's just the wetland itself. And then for shoreland wetlands, there's very strict standards that we have to apply to what, uses are allowed in them.
So every little pond is considered then a wetland?
Correct. If it's mapped wetland, yep.
Just
What
want to
about
make,
if it's navigable water? What part, where's it distinguished?
So, yeah, right, correct. So if you're talking a navigable pond, an open, a wetland that has open water, DNR is typically, through their mapping system, has identified it as having open water. So either staff, if there's a question of it, we would, consult DNR for interpretation whether they consider it navigable. And if that's the case, then yes, it would be 1,000 foot setback to that navigable pond.
1,000, okay, okay, then I'm back to the 1,000. What can you do within that 1,000 feet?
Within that 1,000 feet. So really, it's going to be that structure setback, going back to,
The
let's
high
say
water
it's
mark.
Vacant land, farm field that's going to maybe be converted to a residential lot. Really, it's going to be a 75-foot setback for a new structure to be located there. You're allowed access to that water body, and what you would want, or they would be required to have a 35-foot vegetative buffer. So the idea is that
That was going to be my next question.
Yep, so you would have that vegetative buffer, but you're allowed a access corridor. So a landowner can have developed access to that water body through that 35-foot buffer.
That's what I was wondering, because of some of those ponds are like in a field, like I was wondering how close you could farm to them. That's what I was getting at. And so you're
Okay.
talking the 35-foot, or is it a bigger buffer than that?
So agricultural activities are exempt from disturbance. So that vegetative buffer, of course, we would encourage and love to see 35-foot buffers along, all navigable water bodies, but agricultural activities are exempt from that disturbance of that vegetative buffer.
I also believe we want to make sure that we distinguish between wetlands that are in the shoreland area, which is the 1,000-foot buffer, and wetlands that are not in the 1,000-foot buffer, that are only wetlands, not navigable waterways. We no longer regulate those wetlands that are outside of the shoreland buffer in this ordinance. And that was on one of the previous slides.
Yeah, and to add to that, so let's just say this was a magical 3 or 1,000 feet. It would be this wetland that would be regulated within that 1,000 feet. And a wetland that would be outside of that 1,000 feet would not be regulated. Does that help? Yeah. Okay, good.
What about in a situation, if you are close in towards a navigable waterway, say like the Apple River or something like that, and someone establishes man-made trout farms or items like that, how are those regulated then under this new ordinance?
So you're talking a use, so part of, if it's a new use, to create a, artificial wetland, right? So you're talking more of an artificial wetland within the Apple River. The use would be regulated by our general zoning district. So one, it would have to make sure that that use is allowed within general zoning, for one. And then two, an artificial wetland created in there, would be exempt from wetland rules. But I mean, it'd appear that if they're gonna create a wetland or something to support trout habitat, that they would likely have the hydraulic features at a site to support that. So again, that's kind of hard to answer to see what the rules would be, but ultimately, an artificial wetland created, 10 years ago or today are exempt from wetland or from shoreline rules. That helps.
And one last question on it too. If you have, say, stormwater sedimentary ponds or things like that that are within the 1,000-foot setback, are those under a different kind of regulation then?
Correct. So an artificial pond and a stormwater pond are exempt. So even, and again, that's where the wetland rules did change, where a stormwater pond started taking on wetland features, and so then they were starting to get treated like they were wetlands and couldn't be maintained, right? And so the state exempted them. So a stormwater pond or artificial ponds are exempt from shoreline rules.
Any other questions, any comments from the public on this public hearing? No. Anything else?
That's all I have.
I'm sorry, I should have asked you that first. All right, then we will end the public hearing. And I want to apologize to Mr. John Thomas. I'll get to you in just a few minutes. Thank you. Let's just go ahead and move on to the first business item and vote on this thing, if we can have a motion.
So are you going to ask for a motion first to repeal? Is that what you're asking for?
I believe I'm looking at the resolution, and it repeals and replaces.
Yeah, I'm looking at mine, and I was wondering what part of the agenda we're on. I'm into the ordinance.
Packet page 8. And what we're going to ask for is a motion to, it repeals and then replaces.
Repealing chapter 17.
I can make that motion, so make a motion for an ordinance repealing chapter 17, subchapter 3, section 17.30. or St. Croix County Code of Ordinances, Shoreland Overlay Districts, and reenacting the Shoreland Overlay Districts as Chapter 16 of the St. Croix County Code of Ordinances.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in any discussion?
What's our time frame that we have to be in compliance with the state? Are we
It's been
past?
changing for years, so now,
It's,
yeah, we don't have any time to really
Oh,
debate
there
this.
is no time frame?
Yeah,
okay, I was just curious.
yeah.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to go backwards on the agenda because I had a tough day and I'm kind of dunderheaded. I forgot to do public comment. Mr. John Thomas is here to talk about Lake Malibu. No, we'll,
Just give her a sec.
yeah, just take a sec. Tammy, thank you.
Chair Hansen and members of the committee. My name is John Thomas. I live at 727 Trails Trail in Hudson. And a lot has happened since I last appeared before you. I think that was September. And our vice president of the Lake Malibu Association, Warren Schneider, would have brought you up to date in October. Recently, we took a deep breath and a brave pill and signed an agreement with Applied Ecological Services. And the agreement provides for them to develop a roadmap for us to address the problems that have been created in the river, in Lake Malibu, due to the dam breach last March, as well as the earlier dams that the DNR removed. And this is an $18,000 commitment on our part, paid for out of our dues. And the first order of business for us is to get all of the stakeholders on the same page. Not that they all have to be in agreement, but to try to use common sense to arrive at a common solution. And so this would include all of the governmental bodies in the watershed, as well as the agricultural community, the landowners, the homeowners, as well as the businesses. And this also, I might say, our program ties in very closely. The name escapes me right now, but it's the St. Croix program that is focused on improving the water quality in Lake St. Croix. I'm sorry I can't remember the name of that right now. Does it ring a bell with anybody? It's a water quality St. Croix River Association, I guess. So it ties in very closely with that. And that's it for now. I'll see you next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Now I'd like to introduce Lynn Nelson, the Executive Director of West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and she's going to give us a presentation on the advantages of conducting a community housing inventory.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. This is my first real meeting that I've been to since the middle of March. I've first in person, so I woke up just so excited that I get to go out and see some real faces, so thank you for having us here. As Dan said, my name is Lynn Nelson, and I am the Executive Director of the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. And I have with me Susan Badke, and she is an associate planner with our organization, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about housing studies. Some work that we've done in the region, we're going to provide you with examples that we've done, and then my understanding is that maybe have a conversation about would this make sense for St. Croix County, and if yes, what would that look like? So Susan is actually going to do the majority of the presentation because she is the one that's really worked on our studies in the region. But I will tell you a little bit about our organization before we turn it over to Susan. So the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission is a multi-county planning organization that was created under state statute in 1971. We're one of 9 regional planning commissions covering the entire state, but our territory covers 7 counties in west central Wisconsin, including St. Croix County. Our primary goal is providing planning and technical assistance services to counties and other units of governments throughout that area. Our services fall into 4 broad categories, including economic development, transportation, community development, and then conservation and mapping. And so working on housing studies falls under our community development work, and it's something that, as you're all aware, has become a very hot topic lately. There's lots of housing issues not only in the region, but the state and the nation. And it was our way of trying to assist our area in trying to get a handle on the issue so that you can try to figure out strategies to move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the work that we've done.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. As Lynn said, my name is Susan Badke, and I am one of the planners with the Regional Planning Commission. So the importance of housing. Why talk about housing? Why do a housing study? Essentially, housing is there's a basic need for shelter, right? So housing for all. Everyone needs a place to live. If your house is big, if your house is small, if your house is pink, if your house is black, if your house is 4 bedrooms, if it's 2 bedrooms, really the basic purpose is to provide shelter, and everyone needs that. Also, nationwide housing costs are outpacing household incomes. So what we've seen, and I'll get into that a little bit in talking about both Polk and Barron counties, but what we've seen, and I'm sure you've all have maybe experienced that as well, housing costs continue to rise. Incomes relatively, while they're rising slightly, don't keep up with the pace of the rising housing costs. Supply and demand has an impact on housing costs. So if there's, and also on the workforce. So if you don't have the housing supply necessary to meet the, either the attract new people, if you have job openings and corporations looking to open, but you don't have the housing, that can become problematic with your workforce. And population and household growth, looking at projections over the next 20 years. As a nation, we are aging. As a region, we are aging. In fact, I took a look at St. Croix County's population projections. Now, these were projections prepared by the State Department of Administration. They're a little bit old, but they're the most recent that we have. So they were prepared back in 2013, and they project out to 2040. And for St. Croix County, it does show that the 65-plus group of folks is projected from 2020 to 2040 to increase by 79%. Other age groups, so younger age groups, are also shown to increase, but at a much smaller rate, so less than about 15% per age group. So we do know that the population is rising. We also know that households are getting smaller. So while we have an increased population, we also have smaller number of households, generally speaking. And so you need more housing units to accommodate the growing number of smaller households. So what is a housing study? Just going to talk briefly on why conduct a housing study. So we talked about how there's a general need for basic shelter, but really a housing study can help you better understand the area's current housing situation. So what's your supply? What are your trends? What are your demographics? And what are your housing demands and housing needs? And then looking at how does your supply kind of match your housing demand. You can utilize that study and that data then to attract developers. So oftentimes a developer might be interested in doing a project, but he doesn't really know what, what's needed. And so you can attract developers, also looking at funding and perhaps some policy changes based on what your needs are. And then lastly, really it helps educate and foster a community conversation and perhaps spark and stimulate some partnerships, whether that's between some financial investors and a potential developer or a builder. I will say in both Polk and Barron County, especially more recently in Polk County, we wrapped that study up just in March is when the final documents were released. But in December, we held community forums, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the process part. But that really did strike a lot of folks were very engaged on housing and participated in those conversations. And it also educated them in terms of what are the incomes in my community? What does that mean in terms of what people can afford when it comes to housing? So it really did, just even looking and exploring their housing situation led to some really great conversation and discussion about what housing needs are in the community. It's really 4 primary components of a housing study. Now it can look very different depending on what a community or a county's needs are. But this, generally speaking, this is what you'd find in a housing study. So a community profile, you're looking at background demographics. Like I mentioned, we know there's an aging population that certainly affects the type of housing that a community might be needing. Economic characteristics, so what are the incomes? And then again, looking at your housing supply. So really some baseline data as to where you're at as a county or a community. Kind of the second part would be housing demand projections. So looking at population growth and household trends. So again, we know households are increasing, but household sizes are getting smaller. We then are able to kind of project or forecast how many units are needed in the future. And then we can compare those two. So really, number 3 is comparing 1 and 2. So what are you at? And what are your projections? What do you need? Where are some gaps? What are preferences of folks that are either living here? Perhaps there are renters who would be looking to own a home if there was a certain size of a housing unit. At what price points can people afford based on the incomes in the county, in the communities? So it's really looking at how does your supply compare to your demand. Now you might say, how do we get at the preferences of people? Obviously, preference is hard. There's no data source in the census that really gives us that information. For both Barron and Polk County, while a little bit different in terms of methodology, we did do a survey, and I'll touch on that as well, to get at what are people looking for, what are their preferences. Perhaps they're working in St. Croix County, but they're living in Polk County. Maybe those people would move to St. Croix County if they could find X, Y, or Z. So it's getting at that preference information. And then finally, kind of the 4th component is you have this information, now what? So looking at goals, strategies, and tools. What can the county, what can communities in the county do? Maybe it's a policy change. So for example, we had the conversation in both of these other counties about accessory dwelling units. For those that don't know what accessory dwelling units are, they're essentially a smaller unit contained on the same lot as the primary single-family residence. So it's allowing essentially a small second dwelling on a property. That's just one example. That's not saying that's a one-size-fits-all approach, but that's a type of policy change that a community could look at. So it's looking at what are the needs and then applying. We have a whole toolkit that we look to say what tools would be most appropriate to look to implement, recognizing A, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and B, it takes time. So just because you do one thing doesn't mean all of your housing needs are going to be solved, but what tools can be implemented to work towards your goals? So again, our office worked with Barron and Polk counties to conduct housing studies. And so I'm going to walk you through what kind of our approach and process was, recognizing that could be tweaked to whatever a different county's needs are. So it really depends on what your needs and goals are, and then you craft the process and the approach around that. So in terms of our process, we first met with the county, and in Barron County, there were some, and in both counties actually, there were some communities that participated. They wanted their own individual housing studies done for their specific communities. So we met with initial stakeholders just to talk about what their needs were. What did they want to see done? What questions did they want to have answered in the study? Then we worked to obtain funding for the project. So a portion of the project costs were paid for through a community development block grant. And we helped prepare those applications, and they were both successful. So that covered a portion of the project costs. The remaining funds were provided from the county and the communities based on whoever was participating. We then held a kickoff meeting with the key community and county contacts to present some preliminary data, talk about the process, where they would be instrumental in promoting the project, and what the expectations were for them. A lot of data was collected, as you can imagine. So our primary source of quantitative data, so the numerical data, was from the census. And it's the American Community Survey, which is a 5-year average sample data, so there are some limitations, and so that's why we rely on other data sources as well. Did a number of interviews, and also the survey that I mentioned. And then we held community forums, and that really was our opportunity to share data with the community and also get feedback on that data. So we looked at census data, we talked to a bunch of different folks, we looked at preference information from the surveys, but then the forums allowed us that opportunity to share that data, but also get feedback. Does that represent your community? Does this make sense? Is there something that we haven't thought of? Is there something that you as a community have talked about that we haven't heard of? So that really became a good dialogue for us to present, but also get information back. It really was a two-way loop. In terms of community and HR interviews, like I mentioned, we try to reach out to a whole host of stakeholders and folks, from realtors, lenders, building and zoning officials, landlords, developers, human resource officials. Those folks are in the workplace. They have kind of a better pulse on what are the needs of their employees who either live within the community or the county, or those that live outside. Different residents, housing authorities, and other nonprofit housing organizations. So really we tried to get a wide variety of input in terms of what are the needs of housing in those respective counties. Again, it really was to speak with the local experts. They know the community, they know the county, so they really can provide the best information. And again, it really was to vet the data as well. So as I mentioned, there are some limitations in the quantitative, that American Community Survey data. So it really was to see, does that make sense, or is there something we need to explore further? Housing forums, again, gather feedback, identify and discuss potential strategies or tools, and then really foster that community conversation. And as you can see in the photos, we had a pretty decent turnout at most of the forums. They were well attended, and people were quite engaged as well. So again, in terms of what the study looks like, really you're looking at that community profile, demographic and economic information, housing supply, housing needs and analysis. So here's an example of a table kind of comparing and projecting out to 2040. Now this was for the city of Barron, I guess. But how many housing units are needed? And then we're able to see, where does your supply, How does your supply match up to demand, and how many units? Again, it's an estimate. A lot of things can change, as we know, and as we've seen in the last few months. The market can change, the economy can change. So it's important that you stay in tune and in touch with what's going on, but it certainly gives an idea in terms of how many housing units are needed. And then housing priorities and recommended housing goals and tools. So in these two counties, we had 4 key project deliverables. The first was a data report. That really was a compilation of all the different data sources and data information that we collected. Second was a housing toolbox. That was, again, a lot of the different strategies and tools that the county and communities can look at to work towards some of their housing goals. And then the main report was the housing study and needs assessment. And again, that's drawing from that first piece, that data report. It's drawing from that toolbox and really melding the two together. And then a fun little handout is a housing snapshot. So you can use that really to see what your current situation is, and it really is kind of a summary of the overall report. Table of contents, this is really talking about the toolbox. So again, the toolbox, we looked at a whole variety of different tools that a county and community can utilize. So different tools to guide housing development. Different policies that you can put in place to guide that development. Financial tools, so what financial tools can the county and the community look at? What different financial tools can developers utilize? So the low-income housing tax credit, that's one financial tool that oftentimes developers look at to kind of bring the costs down for a specific project. And other housing tools and partners we also identified in the housing toolbox. So then talking about what are some options. So this is how Barron and Polk County, how they, the process that they utilized. But certainly there are different ways to go about a housing study. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So you could consider engaging different communities in St. Croix County to partner on a study. Recognizing, and I think this was a key driver in the other two studies, the housing market doesn't stop at your municipal boundaries. So even for St. Croix County as a whole, the county boundary, your housing market certainly doesn't stop where St. Croix County's boundary ends. It spills over. Obviously, for St. Croix County, you have the Twin Cities metro area, and that's very influential, in your housing market. So recognizing that. Maybe you don't want a full-blown housing study. Maybe you want to look back, scale it back to looking at just a housing assessment. So what is your supply? What is your demand? That certainly is an option. And maybe it's just looking at different data pieces that help inform different action steps. Maybe you're looking at inventory of different rentals or interviews with certain folks. So it doesn't have to be a full but again, keeping in mind there are limitations to census data, so don't just go and rely on that. It's really important to look at other data sources as well to get that qualitative information. So with that, I'm sure Lynn would too, be happy to entertain any questions that you might have or conversation.
Can I just add a couple of things I just wanted to add to that I thought were important. As part of the process of talking about is there a need for a housing study and who would be involved, in both Polk and Barron counties, a really important part of that was having a key local stakeholder that kind of took the lead on that. So in both of the cases, the County Economic Development Corporation director was the person that was going out to communities and talking about what he felt, what they, both of them, felt were the needs for these housing studies, and they were the champion for the project. So I think that was a really important part, is whoever that person is. It doesn't have to be your Economic Development Corporation, but it could be anyone. But I think it's important to have some local champions that really want to do this type of project and promote it. The other thing, too, is with the funding source. The Community Development Block Grant application that we worked on, that covered 2/3 of the cost of the project. I don't think Susan mentioned that. So it's a really great funding source that makes it a lot more affordable. So.
Any questions? Start with Judy.
Well, I have two. One is that funding grant always available so that we can apply for it?
Yes. The planning money is available on a rolling basis. You can apply for it at any time. And there hasn't, for whatever reason, been that much demand for that program in the state. And so anytime we put those applications together, they've been funded. At least that's been our experience up to now.
And does that help with, do you need to know exactly what communities are going to participate? So you have to have it planned kind of ahead before you do the grant?
Right. The grant has to spell out exactly what's going to be done, the geographic areas that are going to be covered, the process, all of that. And really the cost will be dependent on who's involved. How many studies are we doing? If we're doing individual community studies, we do 1 or we do 5, and a county, I mean, all of that will be calculated into the overall cost. And so we'll need to know that in putting the grant application together to determine the total cost and to know how much block grant money you would want to request.
And that leads me to probably my second question is, there's a huge difference between the east and the west side of St. Croix County. Let's say that the smaller cities, towns, villages on the east side don't want to spend the money or whatnot, but they are a part of St. Croix County. How do you delineate in the study between the areas of the county that are so different in regards to housing and business?
Yep. I'll answer it and I'll see if Susan has anything else to add. So there were really 2 pieces to what we did. One was a county-wide study. So that looks at everything in the county. So that's really the piece that covers all areas. And then it was up to communities if they were interested in saying, we would like more detailed information on just our community. So it's those 2 separate things. So if the county elects to do a study, it will cover the entire county. And then, it's up to you if you would want to include communities that are interested, or you could just do a county study. There's quite a few ways you could approach it.
Other questions? Scott?
There we go. You had mentioned earlier that the grants would be about 2/3 the cost. On a typical, like if we were, say, Dunn or Chippewa County, how, what was the county's responsibility if you know that at all?
Yep.
Sure,
I'll
yeah.
let Susan answer
Yeah.
that one. She remembers.
So again, the total cost of the project really depended on how many communities participated, how many, and even more so, how many studies we, as an agency, were preparing. So that's kind of how the cost lined up. So in total, in terms of, for example, in Polk County, there was the county and 8 communities. So we were preparing 9 studies. I believe the total project cost for those 9 studies, which again includes there was a survey that we conducted. So we worked with, and I didn't mention this, but didn't go into detail, but we worked with the University of Wisconsin River Falls Survey Research Center. So in total, that project cost for 9 studies, it was about $80,000. Now, the community development block grant covered 2/3 of that, up to $50,000. So I don't recall, I think we might have reached that limit, or we were getting close to that 50,000. The county, in terms of Polk County itself, they contributed about $9,000. So it was, if it was just the county, I think the county cost was about, for their study was about $10,000, and then that survey was about $10,000. So if it was just the county that was doing the project, it'd probably be, instead of that 80, it probably would have been a $20,000 study for the county, and then 2/3 of that. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? If other communities wouldn't have participated, if you're looking at the county study and then the survey part, that survey cost about $10,000, and that was divvied up amongst all of the participating communities. So if you remove those, you're looking at about $20,000 for just a county study. In those 2 cases, again, that included that survey.
So there's a cap of 50,000, is that what I heard?
For the community development block grant, correct. It's a maximum of $50,000.
So if you do, is that for each municipality, or is it just for the whole,
That's
the
for
whole
the
block?
project, for the application.
How much of this information does the county currently have, and how up to date is it?
Well, there have been more than one housing study in St. Croix County over the past few years because affordable housing for new business has been an issue that's come up repeatedly through a variety of the organizations, the Building Association, not so much, but somewhat, but some other organizations in the county. We have a housing section in our comprehensive plan that was complete, the last time it was updated was in 2012. It is a project on our list to update the comprehensive plan in 2021, 22, and try to do that, it's an every 10-year thing. And so one of the things Lynn and I did talk a little bit about is this could play into that. And some of the information we would have already created or that we would have developed anyway from our department as part of updating the comp plan. It just depends on what the objectives are. From our point of view, the need for affordable or low income or to moderate income housing is much more apparent in very specific areas of the county. It's not really supported by the general residents in the rural areas. It's supported in the cities and villages, which is where it's needed, and it's supported to a certain extent in other specific areas, kind of like what Judy's pointed out in certain areas. But generally speaking, it's not supported in the average rural areas in like your two towns. And we know that very strongly, we got that message. So it depends on what the objective would be as a group, what you guys are thinking, what you think what the direction is. Some of it, yes, we would have some of it, but they would go into a greater depth than we would as a study. Does that answer your question?
Sean, did you have any questions, thoughts?
A couple questions I was mulling about asking were asked already.
I'm curious about the timeline. Once you apply for the grant, how long does it take to get the grant? And then once you get the grant, generally, how long does it take to spin up the study and run the course of the study?
Sure. And then jump in if I misstate anything. So my recollection, I think that the state, because there's this pot of planning dollars and that typically doesn't get, tapped into or exhausted, generally they're pretty quick on reviewing our applications. And like I say, we've done 2 of them now. So I think typically it's within 30 days that we know once an application is submitted, whether it's been, approved and accepted. And then there's, of course, there is one, in the approaches that we've done. So with both Polk and Barron, now they utilized communities, or they included different communities. And so we identified in each study, one community was kind of the lead community for the application. And so then there are different award documents that have to be executed. But from there on, then, we can get the project started pretty quickly. In terms of the timeline for the project, I would say, this would be if we followed a general similar process, this is our 3rd time now. So both times, with Polk, it got a little bit faster than with the first rodeo of Barron. And so, I think that Polk probably took about, maybe 9 months to get through. I'm just saying that as and it all kind of depends on timing for the forums and data collection and the extent of the process and the survey. But yeah, I'd say it's about 9 months.
So it would be, let me clarify that. So you get about a month for the grant, and then 9 months for the study?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Between 6 and 9 months, I would say.
The only thing I would add is that it can be a little more time consuming on the front end
Right.
if you're going around to communities and saying, are you interested, right? So that adds to your front end time, but it just depends on what you're interested in and how you want to set it up.
That goes, when if you're going around to the different communities, is that all on the county, or will you guys step in and, like, if they're gonna have a meeting with as many interested parties, will you come to that and kind of revamp this again?
Right, so that kind of goes back to that local champion. I mean, we are definitely willing to step in and help, but I think that you're most successful if you have a local champion that really takes on that effort.
I guess coming off of the localities participating, I'm assuming they would take a part of the cost share if they're interested in their own study, correct?
Right. Yep. In the other studies, the county paid their portion of the match for the county study, and the communities paid their portion of the match for their own individual studies.
So our match would be either 20,000 or a little less than that, is that correct?
It would be 1/3 of that, whatever that is. 1/3 of the 20,000, because the block grant will cover 2/3 of the cost. And so the match is 1/3.
But that's only if they just do one and they don't include other community, yeah.
All depends on how many studies in order to generate what that project cost would be, and then the 2/3 of that.
All right. Anything else? Scott?
I guess I'm going to just go back one time back to Ellen. So by the time thinking about what you said and trying to get community support for the grant and the writing, so I'm thinking you're probably more like 12 months out, 12, somewhere in that, to have it finished.
Probably, yeah.
So looking at that, that puts us out a year from now at a minimum. Would this be a good tool for the new introduction for the updating the comprehensive plan?
Well, I think we'd want to sit down with Lynn and talk it through a little bit more, as our staff would. I had some staff members review, take a quick look at the Barron and Dunn County, I think Polk County, excuse me, studies. And but I think definitely would have more information than we would normally have. But I'm going to go back to a lot of that the county doesn't need. Okay, so maybe the scope would change somewhat, because if it was just the county, then I'd shorten the scope up because we don't need it. If the local municipalities are involved, then that larger scope is more important. So that's a couple things. Another couple things that, like, I think that we wouldn't put them on the spot right now, but that we'd want to talk about is, to some extent, when's the next American Community Survey could be done? They, I think the last one was 2017, and it's done every 5 years. Or is that not correct? When is the last one done?
Nope, it comes out yearly.
Oh, it does, okay, I
Yep,
thought you said,
Yep, it's updated, so it's a 5-year average, so
Five,
like it's
got it, okay.
2014 to 2018, 2013 to 2017, so it's an annual,
Okay.
yeah, and I believe it's released on the first of the year, every year, if memory serves.
yeah, well, I'd want to talk through that a little bit. We'd also want to talk a little bit about the 2020 census results and the timing of that and how that could play in. I'm not sure that this right now is the best time to do it. And quite frankly, with the request to cut our operating budgets, I'm not going to commit to this today or even soon. Just FYI, I'm not. So those are two big factors. So again, I don't think it could depend a lot on what other communities. I do agree that there is, and there has been, it's been discussed for a lot, that there's a housing issue in this county. And it'd be really good to do something, but we'd need some local advocates on board and participating, and the county's role in it would maybe be as an umbrella approach, but not really the stronger advocates, because if you go back to one of their first slides, which is very accurate, what's your outcomes you're looking for? If you guys went back to your outcomes slide where you talked about you're looking at changes in, it was one of your very first slides, what is it the outcome? And if you're looking at outcomes, who's going to produce those outcomes? Local municipalities are going to have a lot more impact on housing than we can at the county level. It's always been that way. So we need to look at, yes, we want to help advocate for it, but it doesn't matter how much we advocate if we don't have partners to implement. So I want to have you guys think about, where's that partner to help implement, and partners, and what can, is New Richmond interested? Is the city of Hudson interested? Is the city of River Falls interested? That kind of thing. I would actually expect River Falls to be interested. They're always asking me or telling me how they wish they were in our RPC instead of theirs. But anyway, but that's a different issue. If you ever get those lines changed, I know a group that wants to move. So those are questions we need to talk about, but I would think that at this point, we need to know if you guys want us to have those conversations and what you guys are able to do as far as interest at the local level, local municipality level. Does that put you back right on the spot?
So we go back and talk to our constituent municipalities and see what the local interest is, and try to come back. We'll come back to you in a month or two with what we learn, and if hopefully we find that they see value to this, we'll find a hero and come charging in and ask you to help us out.
And I think that the one thing we do want to emphasize is that this can look however you want it to. We did it a certain way in Polk and Barron counties, but maybe it's something entirely different, or, just a piece of this that best fits with your comprehensive plan, or whatever that may be. But I think that's important, and I do want to, again, emphasize, I think that local champion is really, really important, because to just come in and do a study doesn't do anyone any good if there aren't people there that have bought into the process and want to then take that tool and use it. So that's why that local buy-in is so important.
Just as because I know that when I go to my communities, they're going to ask, how much is this going to cost? Yeah. And I'm going by what you told us about Polk, that, it was, the total cost was $80,000, the grant was $50,000, and the main Polk contributed $9,000, that left about $20,000 between 8 communities. So I'm guessing that depending on the community size, it's from $1,000 to $3,000. Is that accurate or not?
Yeah, I think it was around $3,000 per community was the local match. We didn't differentiate by community size, unless it was a very large community versus, but it was about $3,000 was the local match for the communities.
Okay. Is that before the grant?
That's after the grant.
Just one thing, would you be able to share your PowerPoint for us to kind of be able to mull over the information that you have?
It'll be in the minutes, and it's already in the agenda packet.
Oh, the PowerPoint
Correct?
is?
Yes,
Okay,
Julie's nodding. So it's
then we
taken
already
care
have
of.
it. Thank you.
Yep, and feel free to use that however you need to.
Thanks.
How about an actual study like from Polk County? I'd like to take a look at it. One, just, is that in there
First
too?
page, it's got to click on there.
Oh,
You can get
okay.
into it. Yeah.
All right.
I know I sat through the presentation that they gave for both of those counties, the full-blown presentation, and it's very impressive. And I don't know, what was it, 2 years ago? And I've been thinking ever since that we might find that useful. And when we came up with a conversation not too long ago about what do we need for housing, and the first question I had was, what do we have for housing? So the resources that Ellen's talking about, I guess we need to take a look at what we do have for resources before we start spending money that we don't have. And again, it's a very unfortunate time, because with the pandemic, our revenues are just way down. And I apologize. I hope you don't feel like we're wasting your time.
No, not at all.
I was,
I think these conversations, regardless of what happens, are useful.
yeah, but it's wonderful to know what we have as possible resources. So, thank you. Thank you very, anybody have any other questions before we wrap this up? Thank you so much. Now we're going to start a discussion on Community Development Committee members' goals for 2020, 2023. No? Oh, excuse me. I had a heck of a day. Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about capital improvement projects.
What could be more exciting on a Thursday evening than talking about capital improvements for the next 5 years? And see Scott's all ready for it on Zoom there. All right, we're going to jump ahead. So this is an initial overview of new projects that are being added to the KIP. We look at KIP projects every year. The process is department heads submit their request. It goes to a KIP team, which Ellen is part of that KIP team. The KIP team reviews it, sort of says, yep, that makes sense. They place it into the plan. It goes to the county administrator. It goes to each of the standing committees. And then the county administrator makes then it goes to the committee of the whole, which will be July or early August. And then the county administrator makes a final recommendation based upon all of that input into what the final KIP would be. It's adopted and becomes a part of the county budget. The only part that's technically funded is the next year of the KIP then, once the county board approves that. So we're primarily looking at fiscal year 21 of what those projects will be funded for next year. The other thing, though, is these KIPs, it's a 5-year plan, so we usually see the projects coming 5 years. So really by the time we get to the funding year next year, you should have already have heard about it. Nothing's a surprise here. You've seen it coming for years. So it's really not that exciting anymore. I hate to say it. But what I did do then is I also highlighted new projects that are coming onto the KIP. We're going to look at just the ones, though, that are pertinent to your standing committee, which I highlighted in yellow, so it'll really stand out here for you. And we have a couple of new projects coming up in 2025 is the final year out there. All the other projects that you're seeing that have money in the in-between years, 2021 through 2024, are existing projects. We're happy to review those for you for any of the new county board members. But like I said, for the existing county board members, they've seen this before. It's probably old news for them. The new projects, though, I'm going to highlight are a Squaw Lake boat landing and replacement. It's way down here at the bottom. It's project 10098 is the number that's been assigned to it, and that's $50,000. And then the project right below that, Glen Hills Campground entrance, restroom, and shower facilities for $500,000 out in year 2025. So those are the new projects that have been added. And then we also have a recurring project that we budget $18,000 a year to continually replace parks equipment. Mowers, they tend to wear out after time, so we have to have a continual replacement cycle on those, and so this is how we fund that. Are there any questions, though, on the other projects that are in this area that you have? Now's kind of your chance to delve into your standing committee's projects a little deeper if you have a question on it, before we get to the committee of the whole, which will be the next time that you see it.
My question is the same question I had it. At one point, you had the year. Now, all of a sudden, it's disappeared. So these new members have no idea how long these, I would like the year that the project was put on, included on all KIP. Is that possible? If you did it once, I assume you can do it.
Anything is possible.
Good. I mean, to me, that's important, just to get people an idea of, and it's not for just necessarily this department, but any department. Okay, they've been asking for 4 years, nothing's happened, and let's take care of it. But if we have no idea how many years they've had the request in for, and it hasn't gotten fulfilled, they may be thinking, well, it only started last year. I just think it's important for people to know the history.
Yeah, because sometimes the project, when it gets to committee of the whole, it'll get bumped back. And so it could actually be on for more than 5 years.
And then at least they
So I
can
think
ask the
that's-
question, why has it been on for so long? And then they know the history. But I just feel that it's important to know the history and to understand the history.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we could put a request year on here. So that was a different KIP report that we had. That other KIP report where we added the year was the approved projects, and you could see how long it's been under construction. That's where we added the year before. So I can see a different use for the year here, though, where we're looking at how long it's been sitting out there and it hasn't been funded yet. This is the list really that hasn't been funded yet.
I've often wondered, most of these things are capital improvements in the purest term sense, but some of them are replacing vehicles.
Yep.
And vehicles aren't really capital improvements, they're vehicles, they're expendables. And how do we, when we buy cars and we buy lawnmowers and stuff, I mean, I know it's like operational expense. How is it that why do you do it that way?
Why do we do it that way? Well, you want the right answer or the one that sounds good?
I took accounting a long time ago, so go slow.
So we do it this way because you can borrow for these types of assets. And so,
So we're borrowing for expendables, which seems wrong to me. I'm just going to go on record telling you, I think that's wrong to borrow money for expendables, not long-term assets.
but we're not borrowing for them. We're able to cash flow these because of a number of ways that we do budgeting. We're able to cash flow these because we usually do better on sales tax than what we budget for. So the extra money we roll into the KIP fund. So now on a down year like this year's going to be, we're not going to have extra cash to roll into the KIP fund. And so at some point, we may end up having to borrow for squad cars. But in the past, we have not. We've always been able to carry it through a cash flow system to fund most of these KIPs. We have about $1 million a year of recurring stuff. I mean, replacing carpets and painting walls and buying squad cars and mowers and things that are recurring. It would be great if we could move that onto the tax levy. Absolutely. That would be the best case scenario. But because we have tax levy limitations, we can't just shift it over to the tax levy. We have to find a different way of funding it. And that other way of funding it is borrowing, but for our ability to cash flow it through good sales tax years. So we have enough cash to get through 2021 capital projects. So we maintain a fund balance in the KIP, and it's healthy right now. We'll get through 2021 with no problem. Some of the later years, though, I am a little bit worried about, depending on how long this economic recession lasts. But that's why they're in here and not on the tax levy.
And that's a discussion maybe we need to have in the administration committee, or maybe we should call it the accounting committee. Should we start thinking about, and I don't mean to shoot us in the foot either, but over the long haul, I hate to borrow money for expendables. I'm just saying.
Right. So we
Okay.
had the highest net new construction last year in the state, and we had about $800,000 of new revenues. So we have $1 million of expenses here to move over. So you are going to have to use an entire year. So that means no increases in health insurance, no increases in employee compensation, no additional new employees. Nothing else happens if you wanted to shift it in a single year. So, I mean, it's a huge hurdle to move it.
I get that. Last year we didn't have a pandemic either. We had a great year last year. So I'm just worried about the lag in the water ski rope we're going to have because of the pandemic. And that's what I'm seeing on the horizon coming at us. So just bracing. Thanks for enduring me. Oh, Sean, did you have a comment?
Yeah, would this be easier to handle if we just like phased in these certain recurring costs into the regular budget?
Yeah, but I mean, even if you look at squad cars, which is the one that people bring up usually the most, that's $300,000. I mean, that's still nearly half of my net new construction, and we had the highest net new construction number in the state. So I mean, it's a tough haul to shift that cost. You're going to have to forego something else to move that. And historically, we haven't gotten to that point where we've run out of cash and haven't been able to cash flow these items through other revenue sources exceeding expectations. So St. Croix County is very, very fortunate that we continue to have great sales tax growth. And that growth has allowed us to do it the way we've been doing it.
How have other counties been doing it?
They borrow.
Well, there's
Did you
got to
get-
be a limitation on what they can borrow. I mean, you can't keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, or is that what they do?
You can. So a municipality is limited to 5% of their equalized value in borrowing. So we could borrow $400 million. So that's not going to happen. So that's never going to happen. But we have a huge capacity to do it. And borrowing, just because you could borrow that much, doesn't mean that you're going to just keep borrowing and building the debt. You can borrow and pay it off because there's no limitation on setting the levy to pay your debt. So you could borrow the $1 million that we have of recurring on a 1-year loan, pay it off the next year, and that works. So there's other ways of funding these items rather than putting them on the tax levy and hurting the other things that we want to do with the tax levy. That's how come it's been done this way.
Any other questions or comments, thoughts, suggestions? All right. Ken, we have one.
I was just going to say that based on, despite COVID and the quarantine, our, the development and that we have seen from our office, not saying what's happening in the other municipalities, but kept pace and actually was faster and higher than any other March, April, May we've seen in a long time. So
Yeah.
maybe there's good news on the horizon.
Yeah, we actually just got a report earlier this week too on sales tax for March and April. St. Croix County is down 1.6% compared to the same 2 months last year. So we really haven't seen the forecasted drop that they were thinking. They were thinking it would be a 10 to a 15% drop, and we were only at 1.6%. Sauk County down by the Dells, they were at 33% drop. So other counties haven't fared as well as we have. And then some counties to the north of us, like Polk, they're actually ahead of where they were last year.
Does St. Croix County get the taxes off of Amazon?
Yes.
Does that, okay, so it's the state gets it, but they put it wherever it gets.
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's probably one of the, I mean, it's, anything online is just boomed. And as long as we can get that.
That's actually my guess of why Polk went up. And so people are probably ordering online more rather than going out and coming to St. Croix County and buying. So we saw a small decrease and they actually saw an increase. Yeah. No, but theirs is like a 5% increase, but their 5% would be our 1.6, probably the same dollar amount.
Fun with accounting. Any other thoughts? I sure appreciate the conversation. No, let's protect that stuff in the committee of the whole. Keep building. And I would mention that parks are making money, so we're doing really well in this department.
Just going out of order, do we want to do the financial report as long as Ken is?
Hey, Ken, as long as you're up there, that's a really good suggestion. Let's just keep going.
I can tell by the look on Scott's face, he loves hearing me talk. All right, so we have the financial report. These are figures through May of the year. So we're on target revenue-wise for the Register of Deeds. And then if you look down at the expenses, everyone is still staying pretty much within that 60% remaining on expenses is what you're going to be looking for. The recycling program, they're ahead of schedule. They have more budget remaining. We have hazardous waste. They haven't spent anything yet this year. The parks, so it's early in the parks year, so we have a lot more to see there yet. On the expense side, they still have more expenses left
Well, I'm going to interrupt while you're on parks.
Yes.
Is that 339,000, is that a grant or what? I mean,
Yes, those are probably, I'm not sure exactly, but I do know that we have a variety of revenue that came in from DOT last year. I'm not sure why it's showing up this year, but
yeah, and that's, I was just
That sound
wondering,
right?
I mean, that's a pretty
No.
huge,
that doesn't look right. But it would have to have been some kind of grant, you know.
Yeah, the 67,800% over,
Yeah.
Yeah.
no,
It does jump off the page.
Yeah.
well, that kind of caught my eye, and I just
Yeah.
wasn't,
I
so you're
only
not sure
budgeted for
exactly what
500.
what's going on there?
No, we'll have to take a look at it. There have been some interesting, sometimes things get in the wrong accounts, as we all know, so we'll have to double check that. We catch some, and then we don't catch others.
We catch them all eventually.
Eventually, the auditors are,
Is it possible that that's the donation? And it
oh,
was
yes, it is. It is.
incorrectly?
That is the
Look at
donation.
that. Scott
Yep.
was right on top
Yep.
of it.
The donation from, yes, on Eckert Blufflands. Yes, Zappa donation, that's what that is.
It's finally, that,
So you see, that's why it's in the right category, donations.
Yep. Scott doesn't get enough credit, but he's actually really good with numbers.
I have to use my economics degree sometime.
Then the fairgrounds, we haven't paid anything out on the fair. I don't know what's going to happen with that this year because there isn't a fair.
Oh, well, I have two questions. Okay, you said nothing's been paid out, but if you look at the sheet, it has been paid out. And that's, I know you say that you do that for accounting purposes, but that is so confusing to me because that shows that we have paid it. So let's say they did, I don't understand why you can show something that hasn't happened.
Yep. So what we're showing. Where's this light coming from? Oop. I hit the wrong button. Yeah. So what we're showing here, Judy, is general property tax revenues. So we budget those or allocate those every month. We bring in a portion. So the property taxes that we've levied on St. Croix County to support the fair are coming in. So we're showing that. I don't know how I keep doing that. Yep, and then on the expense side, there's no expenses yet. So we have not cut any checks. We usually cut one check to the fair board. We have not cut that check yet. And considering that there's not a fair,
As a member of the Fair Board, I would like to say that they could still, because one, hopefully I'm okay saying this, that one, they can get a lot of things done that they wouldn't have the finances for. I mean, they have a lot of people that donate money for the buildings and whatnot, but for all the odd little piddly things that they have to try and do out of their budget, especially the restrooms, maybe this will help them update it. And another possibility is because on the agreement that was signed that the fair is responsible for any overages in cost. And this may help them because if it does go over, they're not prepared for that. And this would be part of it, but I don't know if that'll happen or not.
well, it's probably a really good question to ask this committee, since it is under your jurisdiction, is do we still pay the full 80,000? Because is the money that we levied in support of holding the fair? Is it support of the fairgrounds? Do we pay the full amount? Do you pay a portion of it, or do we pay none of it? So,
if we're having that discussion, I think it would be a great place to find your housing study money, We're not having
Oh, no.
We're not having a fair. If we're not gonna have a fair, we could pay them proportionately less, still pay them something for operations, because they have some operations during the course of the year. Pay them their 80 grand next year when they have a fair. They'll be able to operate. Wouldn't hurt them, and we can still get our housing study done, which county kinda needs.
I think if we're really going to make a decision, we should have someone from the fair here to help us make the decision. I mean, I'm on the board, but I don't understand all the intricacies and about how they could utilize that money to help them in ways that would have long-term enhancements for the fair that would be very positive. I would not like to make a decision because I don't feel well enough informed, but it's certainly valid for next month if you want to bring some people from the fair board here so that they know what they're talking about, much more than me.
I think it's a good conversation. We'll put it on the agenda for next month. Any other comments, questions regarding finance report? Seeing none, let's go on. Thank you very much, Ken. Now let's talk about goals. Let's talk about our goals. What do we want to accomplish as a committee during the rest of this term, which is not quite 2 years? And what this is really a nebulous kind of thing. It's not a voting item. It's just what would you like to see done? And now I want to put down one ground rule for this conversation. I do not want to come up with anything that's going to derail the work that this department's doing. The intent here is to talk about supporting the work of the Community Development Department, not adding to it. So within that parameter, let's have a conversation. And I'm sure we've all had some thoughts. Who wants to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. I like to see that Glen Hills project go through to get that extra space that we've determined could be used. So I'd like to make sure that gets executed.
Well, there's a softball. Okay, who's next?
We'll go around until you...
All right. My favorite and perennial deepest desire is that we actually do implement the bike ped plan, that we have people biking from the Loop Trail both to Hudson and to New Richmond and beyond.
I'm going to go in generalities till I get to my specific. We'll go professional development. I know money's tight, but I've been on, especially when I was on the Board of Ed in Glenwood City, when I went down to the convention in Milwaukee every year, I came back with pages of information and notes. I don't know what community development is doing, if they're just doing online stuff or people are actually able to get to different areas of the country and the state to find out what other people are doing, because it's huge. Because you're going to go to something like that and someone's going to have an idea that's going to fit right into what we're doing, but you haven't thought of it. And I know finances are tight, and I just don't know how professional development is being done in community development. I know you have your little slot for professional development funding. Is it enough to, well, okay, that's not putting it, I mean, because you can always want more, but are you able to utilize it in the best way or with a little bit more help? I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing it out.
So that's a great question. And we have a big department, so you have to remember that not everybody does everything every year. But we have been, on occasion, we don't send people really far every year, but on occasion, we've been lucky enough to send people, for instance, our new software program that we've used now on our new zoning code and on our, the shoreland ordinance, and that we will be continuing to use with all the other ordinances we have. We have sent 3 years in a row now. Has it been in a row, or did we skip one? I think it was 2 years and now a third year. We've sent 2 people every year And one year we paid for people actually from the Corp Counsel's office to go down to Texas and spend 4 days and learn how to use that software. Brett and John were the two people who went this past winter. So we do send people, and we have also got, we're smart enough to have all of our employees in at least one organization. I don't think there's a single person who's in less than one, nobody. Everybody, and many of them are in 2 and even 3, and then there's annual conferences. Right now, we don't go anywhere, because everything's canceled, everything, and everything's virtual.
I will say, if I can interrupt for a
Jump in,
second.
please.
Due to the virus, we were able to but do a virtual training on groundwater modeling software, which the alternative was to send a very new employee to somewhere in Ontario, Canada for a 3 or 4 day training. Instead, they were able to do it virtually, so that was actually a benefit. And then also we did have a separate training from land records, so there's training money available in the land records budget, which is GIS, land information. There was a training session this year in Minneapolis that got canceled, and that's going to come back around next year. Moves around all over the country, and it's actually in our location, so we'll be doing that in 2021 versus 2020.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between learning about something and networking and just having and that's something that's almost, well, maybe it's not of equal value, but it's definitely a good, important reason sometimes to participate physically. I'm just making sure that I'm aware of that, and I want you to be aware of that is an important part, and not just community development, of every single department in the whole county, and just making sure that you keep up with what you feel is needed to do the best we can with what we have.
A lot of our money does go to ongoing certifications. A lot of our staff have to maintain certifications. I know it's a lot more discussed what has to happen for Health and Human Services people, but our staff have to maintain those also. And so, and some of it is excessive from state agencies. One of our former employees told me once, takes 6 weeks out of his year just to stay up with all the trainings. So we really have to pick and choose how many people can have those certifications, and not everybody can have them, because that's a lot of staff time, a lot. That particular one, we still do it, but I honestly don't know if it's worth how much time it takes. But I'll just, there are examples, and there are things, regional agency, or regional conferences. For instance, Brett's, the Wisconsin Land Information Association, we use the money in that budget to send a lot of people, registered deeds people, real property people, our GIS people, and they have 2 conferences a year, and we rotate the people, and everybody manages to go pretty aggressively. And they are fabulous conferences. Brett, you're going to have to tell your story about the national person and how impressive it was.
This past year at the Wisconsin Land Information Association, I think I shared that when we did a little bit about our land information program, but just before the pandemic in February, the Land Information Association met. There's about 400 or 500 people from across the state that get together for that, and like you say, that's where the networking occurs. That's where you get the good ideas. What are other counties doing? What are other cities and villages? Anyways, the founder of GIS software, ESRI. In fact, I saw a TV advertisement for this software right around the same time, so that was pretty interesting. Location matters. Anyways, the founder was at our conference and recognized our St. Croix County website for our Perch Lake scuba diving map. So he thought that was pretty interesting. But Jack Dangermond is that individual. Jack Dangermond, yes. And as far as those, some of those trainings, I have had the opportunity to go to San Diego for the national conference where the 14,000 people attend.
So we do pick and choose. Not everybody can go. We do try to spread it around. I had the opportunity not that many years ago to go on, a trip down to Texas, and Kevin went with me because we got to be speakers, and that was a really big deal. Probably the greatest one I ever got to go to. But and when big conferences come to Minneapolis or Chicago, then we try to send people. But we are pretty judicious about any kind of airline flights. Those are really considered, okay, should we really cross that line? And we do it sporadically, maybe at most once every 3 years. So we have to balance it. We got a lot of people, need a lot of training, and they need a lot of continuing ed. So maybe we're not quite as aggressive as what you described, but we try our very best. And we try very diligently, Ken could probably grumble a little bit about that, to use up every dime every year. So we don't always accomplish it, but we try.
This has been very helpful, the explanation of everything. I appreciate that. That has helped.
Ed?
Well, I'm with Dan on the bike path. Town of Somerset's pretty passionate. There was a piece of land that was in jeopardy at the DOT that was, it might have got lost, and the town of Somerset purchased it to keep that open, so it couldn't get closed off by a private person. So we went ahead and got the deal done. And so I'm thinking, hoping someday we can get the bike path through there. The next thing is camper cabins. We can't build enough of them. I'll keep hammering that till the day I die. We can build thousands of them.
You'll be like the Jimmy Carter of camper cabins. Anything else? We'll come around. We'll go second round. I'll give you another chance if you want. We'll give you a second chance if you want. All right. Scott.
This is hard because it takes a lot of thought into it, but one of the things I talked briefly with Ellen about before was for our group at Community Development here to help support the staff and the committee, not the committee, but the administration with supporting enforcement. I think it would be a good idea for us as members of the committee to consider visiting the local municipalities that are in your areas and discuss things and articulate what progress steps as far as when you do have a complaint, zoning complaint, that we have a process where there's a progress that can be identified so it can be followed through. The purpose for the local municipality visit is to be able to give some background as to, introductions, to build up the staff that are there to visit, and then introduce staff and kind of reintroduce. As we know, the turnover rate at the local municipalities is fairly high, and so getting out in the field and being able to talk to them a little bit so they understand would hopefully build a better relationship between the especially in the townships and the staff that they're relying on for support of their ordinances, since most of them are under county zoning. The other thing would be promoting that partnership between the municipality and the town and the county for enforcements where we may consider that when there are complaints and things that we do something a little bit more formal on their part so that there is that backing that this came from the township This is going forward to the county. The county is looking to enforce it, so we don't turn the thing around and have the township giving complaints, and then the person that the complaint is on goes back and all of a sudden the town is backpedaling. I know that doesn't happen all the time, but it's something that we want to also try to prevent and work as a team. So again, it's that promoting that partnership versus us and them.
Scott, what does that look like, partnership? Could you give me for example, what you're thinking of, or?
Well, when you have I'm talking more on the enforcement actions. So if there's an enforcement action, somebody that the township has all of a sudden got all kinds of people that come to a town board meeting on a complaint. And the town board sits down and says, yeah, that's a problem. We need to address it and fix it. So what we're saying is, instead of just making a phone call and doing it, that there's some kind of a formal method that I won't say they'd have to vote and ratify, but something anyway that they're the ones that are initiating. And so that way it can be followed through for the county then for that portion, but also the partnership that as the progress is going on these complaints, that either they can the township is informed, or there's a time, or they have some way to see, well, where's the progress at on this right now? Because the thing that the township deals with too is those same people come to the next town board meeting and the next one, and they're expecting, well, where is things at? We want to. Does that make sense?
So what we're looking for, what you're thinking of, would give, and I'm interpreting this, it would not just make a partnership, but the town leadership, elected town leadership, would then be buying into a solution. They wouldn't be able to, I don't mean this to be driving a wedge, but they would be owning the problem. They would be owning the problem and therefore be invested in finding a solution.
Correct.
Instead of being an observer.
We want everybody to work together. So instead of pitting somebody against each other, we want to work as a team. The town's working as a team with the county to resolve an issue. We take the least, the least aggressive approach and work your way through, but there is an approach and there is a method to it, and we're tracking.
Generally, we don't devolve into a conversation here, but I'm going to try one more.
Subcommittees are just as much work as a full committee. So if you want to do that, just have another meeting. I'd rather have you do that than create a subcommittee. It's just more work for us.
Thank you for your input. We're not going to make a subcommittee. We're not going to fool with that. Wow, that saved me a lot of time. All right, so let's talk about this let's just talk about that with Ellen, get her guidance, and
this isn't something that I want written up that these are goals and expectations. They're just observances and things that, if there's something we can do to help things happen, that's where I'm getting.
Well, when I listen to you, Scott, I'll throw this one idea back just for future discussion, you can think about it, but a few years ago, we created a PowerPoint with examples, and we took that out to a Towns Association meeting, and I know that had a big impact for a while, helped out a lot. And we then not only presented it at the Towns Association meeting, but we took it to three towns that said, come to our town board too. And it wouldn't be that hard to take that document and update it. Oh man, I have to find it. But anyway, and we have already talked about us coming out to your town board, and we'd really like to do that. I hope you're working on getting us an invite. Yeah, and we already have plans to go out to town of Katy coming up too. And with Mike, our new administrator, we'd like to get him out there and get him introduced to everybody, and for sure you'll be going to the next Towns Association meeting. And so there are opportunities and ways we can slowly work at this, and then try to see the relationship built stronger, and tools we can use, and we can certainly come around to. But one more report we have to generate is one more report we have to generate, and one less thing we do, because then it becomes a monthly or quarterly, or, you got to think about where's the best use of our time sometimes. So I'm not against anything. I'm just throwing out thoughts and ideas that there are other ways that maybe would work just as well, and that we have seen be effective sometimes too. So, as you know, sometimes it's just like you just said. I totally think it's a really great point. Turnover is always something we have to keep aware of. So,
I'm going to speak now because mine kind of piggybacks on what Scott was saying. One of my ideas was like, I don't know how much time all the people in community development spend with all the different towns, village, cities, people going through things, explaining things or whatnot. And I'm just thinking that at maybe a Towns Association meeting once a year, I don't know if you could have an explanation. Okay, this is in just general terms. This is what we can do. This is how you can find out this information. Just give them something so maybe they won't bother. Bother is the wrong word, but sometimes you probably feel that way, but that's what you're there for. But something so that maybe they can be a bit more independent and do things more on their own, exactly the opposite of what you were just saying in one sense, but trying to free up I don't know if it would make a difference. Because you were saying that it helped for a little while when you did go to the Towns Association and did
that particular PowerPoint on enforcement that was educational.
Right, and if there was,
But I and/or some of my staff go to every single Towns Association. We don't miss a one. You have to come more often, Joe.
Well, that was my thing. How do I find out when they are?
Could you please ask Jerry to put her on the mailing list?
Oh, okay. I
That'll
would
solve
appreciate
it.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get, you can get, if you get your email to, what's his name,
Paul Hughes.
Paul Hughes, there you go.
Yeah.
Get your email to Paul Hughes.
HUGHES?
HUEG, that's all, very simple. He's the chairman of the town of Hammond.
And he has everybody's email and he just clicks.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will do that, but also just, and it's not saying of anything to do like everybody's, but just an idea to think about, okay, would this save us time in the long run, or would it be more hassle than it's worth?
No, I mean, there's a lot of our staff that are out there, like you just said, we're out a lot. But we could go to a few more town meetings. We really do try to get out there, and I know there's some that we just don't get there enough. We haven't been to Star Prairie in a while, and I don't have any problem going. You can call and ask. I know there's at least one town that one person, I think he's got me on speed dial, so. But that's okay.
Okay, so, any other new ideas, any other goals? I have one, if you don't. I want to, Sean, please.
I was just going to piggyback off Ed with or Supervisor Shackner with the camper cabins.
I'd like to continue getting updates on the water quality implementation from the water quality study. As time goes on, we're going to continue to have, be under scrutiny, public scrutiny, as we should be, and we're going to continue to be, have our agricultural partners looking for guidance, and that's always and constantly on the front burner, and we should have the committee be updated at least, I don't know, maybe a little bit longer interval than quarterly, but with just as things change, we'd like to know what's going on.
Well, Brett can give you unexpectedly, or maybe I shouldn't say unexpectedly, but we were unsure if we could hold one of the most recent screening clinic, the water testing screening clinic that we've been held all last year. We were unsure if we could hold that, and it wasn't planned to have it until July. And then we felt, they changed their minds and decided to use the sign-up genius technique that we've used for the couple of other things that work so well, and hold another screening clinic in June. And it just happened last week. And so
Monday
Brett, of this week, excuse me. And so Brett can give you a 30-second update under announcements, so it's legal on the agenda.
Sure. Instant update. We went to the town of Troy on Monday from 2 to 6. We had Sign Up Genius. The town of Troy sent that out to their mailing list, and we did a Facebook announcement, and I don't recall even if we had a press release for it. But Sign Up Genius, we had 50 people sign up just through the town of Troy email account and through our Facebook, and then we had actually 100 people, 99. I'll say 100 because it sounds better, but we had 99 people attend from that 4-hour period. There was 3 staff members there, myself included, and we took water samples and discussed water quality test results for nitrates with all of the attendees. I thought it was a very successful event. The town of Troy was a very good partner with it. They sent out the information, and their clerk stayed there through the entire event. They did put up their voting panels, so they had plastic sheeting hanging from the ceiling, and we took the tests underneath there. Our staff was all masked up during the whole time. Although I did think that I was the person unscrewing the water samples, I probably should have been wearing my plastic gloves or something, but I'll let you know if I'm missing for 14 days. No, it was a very successful event. I thought we had good response and good conversation, and through that we were able to fill 4 or 5 more of our empty grids for the long-term 5-year study. So that's one of the results of this, is the very good conversation that's happening. Water samples were all the way. We had some high samples. We were able to talk to people about reverse osmosis, what they should do next, and we had some very good water quality samples as well. So, and we have another one coming up in town of St. Joe. We're communicating with St. Joe clerk right now about going forward with that one because of the positive results of this one. And like the rest of it, that was the in nitrate screening clinic. We're getting more people signed up for the long-term study, and we're also getting more people for the nitrate source analysis through these other actions.
Wow, that's
So you're going to reschedule like the ones like that were canceled?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to be talking to us?
Yeah. Yep.
And I'll just add 2 things that Brett didn't mention. There were 100, I understood, tests because one person brought in 2 samples.
Well, I think they were recorded.
I also
Separately.
heard they came, well, whatever.
Yeah,
I heard there
whatever.
was 100 tests and 99 people, so maybe that was wrong. And then the other big thing to look at it is it's definitely gaining in popularity because Brett himself told me that the last test we had, which we thought we had a fabulous turnout in February, was 100 people in 8 hours, and this was 100 people in 4 hours. So.
Yep.
Thank you. Good work. All right. Any other ideas for goals or direction that we should be looking toward.
My last one.
All right.
And I guess it starts with a question. Have you filled all the open positions for staff?
We have a position that I hope to offer maybe tomorrow if I get the background report, and then we'll be down to a half a position to fill. So one position technically. If we don't get that background report, maybe next week.
Is this something that we should look at?
I know it's a bad year to even say this or bring this up, and last year, the really positive thing was that our land use positions, ones who deal with planning and zoning, were all reclassified and moved up a pay grade, which was a really great thing. We appreciated that very much, and I requested that in the budget process. That won't be, but the reality was that then when we went to fill the more entry-level positions, we got pretty good candidates. We were able to hire, and that went pretty well. Then turn around and the more experienced candidates, that's the one we hope to offer in the next couple of days. I will say that we really struggled. We started advertising in December, and we didn't get a single candidate that actually has any direct experience with exactly in planning and zoning. We got related experience. We feel the person that we finally have found here in June will be a fabulous candidate, will pick it up really fast, has the right educational training, and the right attitude and the right related experience, but we aren't getting what we hoped, which was someone who would come and just move, not a lateral move, but certainly a experienced move. So I wonder if maybe it didn't get reclassified quite the right enough. So I'll just throw that out. We're also having we had trouble with a couple other positions, but we're getting closer. And sometimes it just takes time to find the right person. And I don't think this is the year that we're going to be able to really have a real in-depth discussion about this because the money just isn't there. And also, perhaps it was just a bad situation. I don't know if COVID could really be just the reason for everything. It's so strange because before COVID was a super tight job market. Everybody who wanted a new job was getting them, and they were getting better money and better pay and everything. And now it's, completely the opposite. So,
Would it be advantageous to put this to the, admin committee to have them go through just the community development job? I know you said it was just done, but would that be beneficial at all?
I think there's a bigger discussion there, and I wouldn't want to suggest that right now because I'd like to think that would be a better discussion to have perhaps with HR and get some more feedback from them. There is definitely a question there. I mean, I think it was very disappointing that we didn't have a lot better applicants. But I don't want to demean the ones we got because we actually kept at it and kept at it and kept at it and got really good people in the end. So, and of course, I can't 100% say that because we'll have to see. For instance, for our GIS position that we filled, our new position, we had, 60 candidates? Brett had a lot to look through. And so GIS, we were spot on, that kind of a thing, if you want to say it that way. And we got a fabulous person who's been, started work on a Monday and was told on Thursday, we're shutting down, so, but yet did amazing work from home, was able to adapt and step in, and it was real poster child of what can be accomplished. And our other new people, they did we had several of them that really stepped up, and we made sure that if anybody didn't have anything they could do at home, we talked to them about expanding their online education and doing projects like that. And we had several people take advantage of our GIS training, which we have a very generous budget for. So we kept people busy. Like I said last month, during the whole entire shutdown, the exceptions were situations where people couldn't stay busy because of personal reasons. So.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you see this committee as being open enough so when you get to the level of being concerned enough to go beyond, that you will come forward and then hopefully this committee can help out.
Well, if it wasn't for our current financial situation, I'd already be saying, yeah, Judy, let's go do that. So maybe, right away next year, ask that same question and let's do it again. Ken's looking at me like daggers, yes. Yeah.
All right, before we take over
Okay.
the full operation of the county, let's just go ahead and ask for announcements and correspondence.
Yep, I have a correspondence here.
Thank you, Judy, that was a good question.
And I need 1, 2, 3, 4. So, I don't know why, if we've gotten these in the past and they haven't made it to my office or something, but at any rate, this is a document put out. In addition to your responsibilities as Community Development Committee, you are aware you are also the, officially under state statute, the Land and Water Conservation Committee. And so this is a Land and Water Conservation Committee member handbook. And we'll make sure we get one to Dick, because this also is for him, and I do have an extra in case someone would lose it, or we'll keep it as a reference in the office.
A whole page.
Yes, because I put you on the list because I'm required to.
There will be
Yeah.
a quiz.
I get them too, and they go into a certain box because I can't keep up. It's like 20 a week. It's awful, awful. It's just horrible. So you probably should just create an extra folder and send them right there, like I do.
Request for future agenda items.
I think you have
The
the
fair.
Fair Board.
Right, we're going to take some money from the fair for our housing study.
No, we are not.
gonna
We are
talk
going to
about it.
talk to the Fair Board next month.
We're going to ask them how much money they can cough up. All right, and then that'll be one item. And then the next, anybody else have anything yet?
Did you want a water quality thing?
No, we
Oh,
got one
okay.
tonight, and Brett will bring it to us as he sees fit. That's what I asked for as a goal, is to keep us posted. Then that being said, the date of the next meeting is July 16, 2020, and I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you for coming. It was a good time.